The dusty street was silent when the Apache woman's sharp voice cut through the heat. "Cowboy, what's that lizard doing under your belt?" she yelled, her eyes blazing with mischief. The men nearby froze, half in shock, half in laughter, while the cowboy's face burned red. He had thought himself untouchable, but in that moment, everyone saw he'd just been brought to his knees, not by a bullet, but by her words. And what followed made the whole town tremble. Dry Creek was no stranger to trouble, but the morning had begun like any other. Dust swirling in the streets, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing, and cowboys swaggering between the saloon and the general store. Among them was Jack Doyle, a ranch hand known less for his work than for his mouth. He thrived on mocking anyone who crossed his path, especially those he thought couldn't strike back. That day, his target was Ayanna, a young Apache woman who had come into town with baskets of woven cloth to trade. She stood tall, her braids catching the sun, her eyes sharp as obsidian. Though many in Dry Creek looked at her with suspicion, she carried herself with a calm pride that silenced more than one whisper. Jack, though, saw only an opportunity. He leaned against the hitching post, spurs jingling, and smirked loud enough for all to hear. "Never thought I'd see the day the Wild sent one of theirs to bargain over buttons and thread. Must be a poor camp that sends its women to do men's work." A few cowboys chuckled, but Ayanna's expression didn't change. She laid the cloth carefully on the porch rail of the store, then lifted her chin. Her voice rang clear, sharp enough to cut through the murmur of the street. "Cowboy, what's that lizard doing under your belt?" The words landed like a bullet. The crowd erupted, some laughing, others gasping, a few muttering under their breath. Jack stiffened, his smirk vanishing as heat rose to his face. His hand twitched toward his holster, then froze. Even he knew drawing on an unarmed woman in broad daylight would mark him a coward forever. Ayanna didn't move closer, didn't shout again. She simply let the silence swell, her words echoing louder than any gunshot. In a town where men lived and died by pride, she had struck deeper than steel. But Dry Creek was not a place where insults ended with laughter. And Jack Doyle was not a man who forgave humiliation. Jack Doyle's laugh came late, brittle and forced. He straightened from the hitching post, brushing the dust from his vest as though the Apache woman's words hadn't cut him open. But his flushed face betrayed the truth. Every eye in Dry Creek had seen him stumble, and that was something a cowboy like Jack could never abide. "Well now," he drawled, his voice pitched too loud. "Reckon this one's got a sharp tongue, but a sharp tongue don't scare me none." He spat into the dirt, trying to mask the tremor in his hands. The street buzzed with whispers. Some cowboys chuckled, glad to see Jack humbled. Others glanced nervously at Ayanna, afraid that her boldness would draw more than laughter. In Dry Creek, words had a way of leading to blood. Ayanna didn't flinch. She gathered the cloth back into her basket, her movements calm, deliberate. When she finally looked up, her gaze locked on Jack. "You think yourself a man because you shout loud and spit far. But everyone here just saw you shrink." The crowd erupted again, half in laughter, half in sharp intakes of breath. Jack's pride, already stung, burned hotter. His jaw tightened as he stepped closer, boots grinding against the dusty street. "You'd best mind that mouth," he warned, his voice low now, stripped of swagger. "Out here, words can dig your grave faster than a shovel." Ayanna's chin lifted, unshaken. "Then dig, cowboy, but know this, I don't scare easy, and I don't bow." For a heartbeat, silence wrapped the street. Even the horses tied at the posts seemed to hold still. Jack's hand twitched toward his belt, not for his revolver but for the coiled whip he carried. He snapped it loose with a crack that echoed off the wooden buildings, making a child yelp and clutch his mother's hand. The whip licked the air, its threat plain. Sheriff Caldwell stepped from the saloon, his hat pulled low, his eyes hard. "Enough." His voice carried like gravel dragged over stone. "Jack, put that thing away. You lay a hand on her, you'll answer to me." Jack sneered, but he coiled the whip reluctantly, his pride warring with fear of the lawman. "Reckon the sheriff's gone soft," he muttered, loud enough for all to hear. Caldwell's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he fixed Jack with a stare that promised consequences. Then he turned to Ayanna. "You're safe here, miss. Don't let the bark of fools scare you. Ayana inclined her head slightly, though her eyes never left Jack. "I fear nothing here," she said, her voice calm as water. Jack laughed again, but the sound was hollow. He backed away, spurs jingling, every step fueled by wounded pride. "This ain't done, Apache. You'll learn what happens when you shame a man in front of his town." The crowd slowly dispersed, whispers trailing in the dust. Some muttered admiration for Ayana's courage, others shook their heads, certain this insult would bring only trouble. Inside the mercantile, the shopkeeper's wife pressed close to her husband. "She should never have come. She'll bring blood down on us." But out on the boardwalk, Jonah Price, the blacksmith's apprentice, whispered to a friend, "She's got more guts than Doyle and his whole lot. Did you see his face?" Ayana carried her basket to her horse, her back straight, her steps measured. Daniel Harper, the rancher who had watched quietly from the shadows, tipped his hat as she passed. "Ma'am," he said simply, respect in his tone. She acknowledged him with a nod, then mounted and rode out of town without a word. Behind her, Jack Doyle stood fuming outside the saloon, his fists clenched, his humiliation burning hotter with every whisper. His friends gathered around, their faces tight with anger. "You gonna let that stand, Jack?" one asked. Jack's eyes narrowed, his voice low and venomous. "No, she wanted to make a fool of me. Then she'll learn what it means to cross a man in Dry Creek." The desert wind carried the dust long after Ayana rode out of Dry Creek. Behind her, whispers turned into promises of trouble, and every eye that had laughed at Jack Doyle's humiliation knew the matter was far from settled. Jack spent the evening drinking in the saloon, his pride festering like an open wound. His friends circled him, feeding his rage with every word. "She cut you down in front of everyone, made you look like a boy, not a man. If you let it stand, no one will respect you again." Jack slammed his glass on the table, liquor spilling across the wood. "Then it won't stand. She'll regret that tongue. I'll see to it." By nightfall, his plan was clear. He would not face her in the street. Too many eyes, too much law between them. To no saints, he would take his vengeance where no sheriff could interfere. Her camp, her land, the quiet places beyond the town's reach. Ayana had felt the shift before she even reached her people's camp. She had seen enough men like Jack Doyle to know pride was more dangerous than any revolver. Her words had struck harder than she intended, but she did not regret them. What she did regret was that he would not let them go. That night, she sat by the fire with her aunt, weaving cloth with steady hands, though her thoughts spun restless. Her aunt studied her in silence before speaking. "Your tongue is sharp, child, but sharp tongues cut both ways. You struck him deep. He will bleed you back." Ayana's eyes flickered to the flames. "Then let him try. I will not bow to a man who thinks me weak." Her aunt's hand closed over hers, weathered and strong. "Strength is not only in standing tall. It is in knowing when to stand together. You are not alone in this." The words gave her pause. Alone she could defy, but together she might withstand what was coming. Back in town, Sheriff Caldwell leaned against the porch rail outside his office, the night air heavy with unease. Daniel Harper approached, his stride slow, thoughtful. "He won't let it go," Daniel said quietly. Caldwell's mustache twitched. "I know. You'll stop him." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "I'll try, but a man's pride don't fit in a jail cell. When it festers, it seeps out. Best pray it don't spill blood on your land." Daniel nodded grimly. He knew Jack Doyle too well. Knew the way men like him measured their worth by how far others bent before them, and he also knew Ayana's pride would never bend. 2 nights later, the silence broke. Ayana's horses shrieked in the dark, their hooves pounding against the corral. She bolted from her tent, the firelight behind her throwing her silhouette into the night. Shapes moved in the shadows, men on horseback, their faces hidden, their laughter sharp and cruel. One torch sailed over the fence, crashing into the corral. Flames licked the dry hay, spreading fast. The horses reared in panic. "Run back to your people, Apache," a voice jeered through the dark. "Or burn with your beasts." Ayana's blood ran cold, but her hands did not tremble. She grabbed a bucket of water, dousing the first flame, then another. Sparks seared her skin, but she pressed on. The riders didn't advance, not yet. They circled, testing her, waiting to see fear. Instead, she raised her voice, clear and defiant. "Tell Doyle his lizard still hides under his belt. He'll never be more than laughter to me." The night split with their curses. A shot rang out, splintering the corral post inches from her head. The riders wheeled their horses and vanished into the desert, leaving smoke curling in the air and the scent of vengeance behind them. By dawn, Daniel rode hard to her camp, finding her skin blistered from smoke, her hands raw but her eyes steady. "You can't fight this alone," he said, his voice thick with worry. Ayanna met his gaze. "Then why are you here?" Daniel hesitated, then dismounted, setting his shotgun against the fence. "Because if he comes again, he won't face just you." Her lips curved faintly, the closest she came to a smile. "Then let him come." Jack Doyle's pride had already turned to fire, and now the desert itself seemed to wait for blood. Would Dry Creek stand with the Apache woman, or would it watch as Jack dragged her into ruin? The desert sun beat hard on Dry Creek the next morning, yet the air felt colder than night. Whispers spread through town like wildfire. Jack Doyle had ridden against the Apache woman's camp, torches in hand. Some said she fought him off with her bare hands. Others swore she'd cursed his men and sent them fleeing. Whatever the truth, no one could ignore it. There was no going back now. At the Mercantile, townsfolk gathered in tight clusters, voices sharp with fear. "He'll bring the whole range down on us," one farmer muttered. "She should have never come here, now we're all in danger." A blacksmith shook his head, sweat streaking his soot-covered face. "Danger? She's the only one with the courage to stand against him. If Doyle weren't so drunk on his own pride, none of this would have started." The debate grew louder until Sheriff Caldwell strode into the square, his boots heavy, his face carved with exhaustion. He raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "Enough. I'll say this plain. Jack Doyle crossed a line. He brought fire to her corral. That's no prank. That's a crime. But don't fool yourselves. This fight won't end with one burned fence." His words stirred unease, but no one could argue. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Jack wouldn't stop until one side broke. Ayanna returned to town that afternoon, her arm wrapped in a strip of cloth where a splinter had cut her during the fire. She rode tall, her expression unreadable, but the weight of every gaze pressed heavy on her. Children peered from doorways, women whispered behind their hands, and men shifted uncomfortably as she passed. She tied her horse outside the sheriff's office, her movements deliberate, steady. Inside, Caldwell rose from his desk, Daniel already waiting with arms crossed. "You should have stayed at camp," Caldwell said gruffly. "Coming here'll only stoke the flames." Ayanna's eyes sharpened. "Flames already burn, Sheriff. Hiding won't put them out." Daniel nodded, his voice low but firm. "She's right. Doyle's not looking for peace. He wants blood. And if we leave her to fight alone, it won't just be her blood spilled." Caldwell exhaled through his nose. Weary. "You asking me to drag the whole town into this? Folks already mutter she's cursed. You think they'll risk their children for her pride?" Ayanna's voice was calm, but each word struck like steel. "It isn't my pride they fear. It's his. If you bow to one man's wounded ego, then this town is already lost." The sheriff held her gaze, then looked away, his jaw working. "You've got fire. I'll give you that. But fire burns everything it touches. Don't forget that." That night, Jack Doyle gathered his closest allies in the saloon. Whiskey flowed. Pride roared louder than reason. He slammed his glass down, pointing toward the desert. "She thinks she can shame me and ride free. I'll see her gone. And any man who stands with her buried beside her." His friends cheered, emboldened by drink and fury. One spat into the sawdust. "She's just one woman, Jack. Why's she worth all this trouble?" Jack's smile was thin, cruel. "Because she made me a fool in front of the whole town. If I don't break her, then every fool in Dry Creek will think me weak, and weakness kills faster than bullets." 2 days later, the warning came. A bullet lodged itself in Ayanna's porch post at dawn, followed by silence. No rider in sight, no trail to follow, just a message carved in lead. Daniel rode out within the hour, jaw set, eyes hard. "Eyes pushing you, testing you. Next time it won't be a warning." Ayana stood by the post, her fingers brushing the scarred wood. Her voice was steady, almost cold. "Then next time I won't warn him either." By evening the town was restless. Some locked their doors, muttering that the Apache woman should leave before more blood fell. Others lingered near the saloon, whispering of how she had stood taller than any man when Doyle cracked his whip. Jonah Price, the blacksmith's apprentice, spat into the dirt as he listened. "They talk like she's the problem, but I saw Doyle's face when she cut him down. He ain't hunting her because she's dangerous. He's hunting her because she showed him for what he is. A coward." That night, Ayana sat alone by her fire, the desert stretched wide and silent, the stars burning overhead. She thought of her aunt's words, of Daniel's loyalty, of the sheriff's warning, and she thought of Doyle, his pride like a sickness infecting the whole town. Her voice rose softly into the night. "If they want fear, they'll have to take it from me by force. I will not hand it to them." In the distance, coyotes howled, and beneath their cries, the faint echo of hooves carried on the wind. Jack Doyle was no longer content with threats. His riders were coming, and this time Dry Creek would be forced to choose, stand with the Apache woman or watch her fall alone. The riders came at dusk. The sky burned red as the sun sank, shadows stretching long across the desert. Ayana was hauling water from the well when she heard the low thunder of hooves. She froze, her hands still, every muscle braced. Out of the dust, 4 men rode into her camp, faces half covered with bandanas, rifles slung across their shoulders. Jack Doyle wasn't among them, but his venom was, etched in their grins, in the way they circled like wolves. One rider leaned from the saddle, his voice mocking. "Our friend sends his regards, Apache. Said to tell you, next time, he won't be so polite." He hurled a bottle at her feet. It shattered, flames erupting as the kerosene inside caught fire. Ayana didn't flinch. She stepped back from the blaze, her eyes sharp, her voice cutting through the crackle. "Tell Jack Doyle he hides behind boys and fire. When he finds courage, he can face me himself." The men laughed, but unease flickered in their eyes. None dared ride closer. They circled once more, fired shots into the air, and galloped off into the desert, leaving smoke curling in their wake. Word reached Dry Creek before the smoke even faded. By nightfall, the saloon buzzed like a hornet's nest. Some townsfolk slammed their mugs down, voices rising. "She's bringing this on us. Doyle's got kin, friends. He won't stop till he burns us all. Best send her packing before we're the ones buried." But others pushed back. Jonah Price leapt onto a chair, his young voice cracking but fierce. "You talk like cowards. She's not the one burning fields. Doyle is. She's not the one firing shots in the dark. You throw her out, you tell every outlaw this town bows to fear." The saloon roared with arguments, fists slamming on tables, curses flying. Sheriff Caldwell stormed in, firing a single shot into the ceiling. Silence fell hard. "You think bickering will save you," he barked. "This ain't about Apache or Cowboy. It's about whether Dry Creek stands or crawls. Doyle's testing us, and if we break, we'll never stop breaking." His words carried weight, but fear still gnawed at the crowd. They weren't soldiers, they were farmers, merchants, mothers with children, and fear is a louder voice than pride. Meanwhile, Daniel Harper rode out to Ayana's camp. He found her dousing the last of the flames, her face lit by firelight, her braid loosened from the fight. "You can't stay out here alone," Daniel said, his tone low but urgent. "Next time, they won't just circle. They'll burn it all down." Ayana's eyes met his. "If I leave, I bow. And if I bow, I lose more than land. I lose myself." Daniel studied her, torn between admiration and fear. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, but his hand tightened on his shotgun. "Then you won't face it alone." At dawn, Caldwell called a meeting in the church hall. The whole town gathered, faces tight with worry. He laid it plain. Doyle's making war. He'll come again and harder. We got 2 choices, stand with the widow or hand her over and beg he spares us. Murmurs filled the hall. An older rancher spat into the dust. "Spare us. Doyle won't stop even if she leaves, but at least he won't burn my fields first." A shopkeeper's wife shook her head sharply. "You think he'll stop at her? Today it's the Apache Woman. Tomorrow it's you. The only reason we still stand is because she stood first." The room split down the middle. Fear against pride, surrender against defiance. Caldwell's voice cut through them all. "I won't lie. Standing with her may mean blood, but giving her up means losing our soul." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. No vote was taken. The town left divided, eyes darting, trust fraying like rope ready to snap. That evening, as Ayanna prepared her fire, she saw lanterns flicker at the edge of her land. Not Doyle's men this time, but townsfolk. Some came with bread, water, and blankets, quiet gifts of solidarity. Others came with whispers of warning. "They're talking of driving you out," one woman admitted, pressing a loaf of bread into Ayanna's hands. Men met at the saloon after dark. "Some say it's the only way to save Dry Creek." Ayanna took the bread, her expression unreadable. "Let them come. My ground is my ground. If they try to take it, they'll see what Doyle's men saw." That night, Dry Creek was no longer a town. It was two camps, one in shadow, one in light. Fear and pride clashed in every whispered conversation, every sidelong glance. And in the dark, Jack Doyle sharpened his knife, his grin sharp as the blade. "Tomorrow," he muttered to his men, "tomorrow we stop hiding in shadows. Tomorrow we finish this." The attack came before dawn. The desert was still wrapped in grey light when the first shot cracked across Ayanna's camp. A bullet whistled past her tent, splitting the canvas, followed by the thunder of hooves. She was on her feet in an instant, rifle in hand, eyes sharp as the riders burst from the dust. This time, Jack Doyle rode at their head. His face was twisted with fury, his pride carved into every line of his sneer. "Burn it all!" he roared, his voice carrying over the chaos. Torches sailed through the air, landing against the corral, the well, the half-finished loom by the fire. Flames leapt high, licking the morning sky. Horses screamed, tether ropes straining. Ayanna fired once, dropping a torch before it reached the water barrels. She spun, reloaded with practiced hands, and shot again, grazing the leg of a rider who fell hard into the dust. She moved fast, her body alive with determination, but the riders were too many. Then Daniel Harper arrived, charging from the ridge with his shotgun blazing. He cut a path through the smoke, scattering two riders before they could light the barn. Jonah Price wasn't far behind, swinging his hammer with reckless courage, knocking a gun from one outlaw's hands. "Hold the line!" Daniel shouted over the din. Ayanna's rifle cracked in answer, steady as her breath. Together, the three of them pushed back, refusing to bend. But even as they fought, they knew this wasn't a skirmish. It was a war meant to end with blood. Back in town, Sheriff Caldwell was roused by the echo of gunfire. He burst from his office, boots pounding against the boardwalk. "They've gone for her camp," he bellowed. The church bell clanged in alarm, its hollow cry pulling townsfolk from their beds. Fear rippled through Dry Creek. Some clutched their children close, whispering to stay hidden. Others argued in the square, voices sharp with panic. "They'll kill us all if we fight with her," one farmer shouted. "Then what? We hand her over and hope Doyle stops there," another snapped back. "Better cursed alive than brave and buried," a woman muttered, clutching her shawl tight. The argument swelled until Caldwell fired his pistol into the air. "Enough! You want to cower? Fine. But I'm riding to that camp. Any man with a spine left in him can follow me." The silence that followed was thick. Then Jonah's master, the blacksmith, stepped forward, rifle in hand. "I'll ride." A rancher followed, then another. Slowly, a handful of men and women stepped from the crowd, leaving the rest trembling in the shadows. At the camp, the fight raged. Ayanna's basket of woven cloth burned, the corral post split with flame, but still she stood. Her braid had come loose, strands whipping her face as she fired, reloaded, fired again. Doyle's men circled like vultures, but they couldn't break her line. Jack himself spurred forward, revolver drawn. His shot grazed Daniel's shoulder, spinning him back. "This ends now," he shouted. Ayanna turned, rifle raised. "Yes," she answered. Her shot tore the revolver from his grip, sending it clattering to the dirt. The riders faltered, stunned. Before Jack could recover, the sound of more hoofbeats thundered in. Caldwell, and his riders burst into the clearing, guns blazing. Smoke filled the air, bullets screamed, and suddenly the balance shifted. The outlaws cursed, forced back under the storm of fire. One fell, another fled outright, spurring his horse hard into the desert. Jack staggered to his feet, rage and disbelief mingling in his eyes. He had come to bury her, but now he was the one facing defeat. "Fall back," he roared, his voice hoarse. His men dragged him onto a horse, retreating in a cloud of dust and curses. When the last hoofbeat faded, silence settled heavy over the camp. The corral smoldered, the loom was ash, but the farmhouse still stood. Ayanna lowered her rifle, her arms trembling from exhaustion. Caldwell dismounted, his hat low over his eyes. "You held them," he said, his voice rough, "but this won't be the last time." Ayanna met his gaze. "Then I'll be ready." Daniel clutched his wounded shoulder, his jaw tight. "You don't have to be ready alone. Today proved it. You stood and others stood with you. That's what Doyle fears most." Jonah, his hammer blackened with smoke, added breathlessly, "He came to terrify us. But it's him that rode away afraid." Back in town, whispers began to shift. Where once they called her curse, now some spoke of her as shield. Children mimicked her stance with sticks, firing at invisible riders. Women whispered thanks under their breath. And the men who had stayed behind carried shame heavier than iron, but others weren't swayed. In the saloon, a rancher muttered darkly, "This ain't over. Every day she stays, we edge closer to ruin." The line in Dry Creek was drawn sharper than ever. Some saw her as salvation, others as doom. Jack Doyle had been driven back, but not broken. And as Dry Creek whispered her name with both awe and fear, Ayanna knew the real battle had only just begun. Jack Doyle rode back into the desert with smoke in his lungs and shame burning in his gut. His men rode in silence, their torches dead, their confidence shattered. The attack that was meant to end the Apache Woman had ended with Dry Creek itself standing against him. But Jack's pride wasn't broken. It had only grown meaner. Around the dying campfire that night, he spat into the dust and growled, "Guns won't do it. Not while that sheriff plays her guard dog. No, we turned the town against her. Let them do our work for us." His men looked at him, uneasy. "And how we do that?" one asked. Jack's eyes gleamed. "Fear. She's already split them in two. We make her the reason they can't sleep at night. Sooner or later they'll decide she's the real curse." In Dry Creek, the morning sun revealed both relief and unrest. Some townsfolk walked straighter, whispering of how they had stood beside the widow and driven back outlaws, but others muttered that the price had been too high. At the mercantile, two women argued over flour. "She fought for us all," one said firmly. "If not for her, Doyle would have burned us to ash." The other shook her head. "She drew him here, don't you see? We'll be the ones to pay until she's gone." By noon, the argument spilled into the street. Ranchers, merchants, mothers with children, they all took sides, their voices clashing louder than the church bell. Sheriff Caldwell tried to calm them, his voice steady but tired. "She ain't the curse. Doyle is. Don't let him twist you into blaming the one who stood for you." But his words couldn't quiet fear, and Jack Doyle knew it. That evening, someone found a note nailed to the church door. The handwriting was crude, the message simple. "As long as the Apache Woman stays, none of you are safe." By morning, rumors spread faster than fire. Some swore they'd seen her speaking with riders in the night. Others claimed she'd cursed Doyle's men into fleeing. The truth mattered less than the fear it fed. At her camp, Ayanna heard the whispers carried on the wind. Daniel arrived with a grim look, tossing the torn note onto her table. "He's turning them, little by little." Ayanna studied the words, her face calm but her chest heavy. "Fear is his weapon, but fear dies when it's faced." Daniel shook his head. "Not always. Sometimes it grows." Jonah Price, the blacksmith's apprentice, found himself in the middle of the town's bickering. He slammed his hammer on the anvil, sparks flying. "She ain't the problem. Doyle is." But when he looked up, he saw neighbors he'd known all his life turning away, unwilling to hear. Even the blacksmith muttered, "Best keep your mouth shut, boy. Folks'll mark you as cursed if you stand too close to her." But Jonah's jaw set stubborn. "Then let them mark me. I know the truth. Meanwhile, Doyle moved in shadows. His men spread through the saloon, dropping coins and whispers. Funny, ain't it? A woman brings death to your door, and you thank her for it. Shame on a town that lets itself be led by an Apache. She's not fighting for you, she's fighting for herself, and you'll pay the price. The poison spread quietly, sinking into fearful hearts. That night, Ayanna sat by her fire, the desert wind carrying the voices of the town. She felt their fear pressing against her like the weight of sand. Daniel sat across from her, sharpening his knife in silence. They'll turn, he said at last. Doyle's right about one thing. They can't bear living in fear, and the easiest thing to fear is you. Ayanna's gaze stayed fixed on the flames. Then I'll face them as I faced him. If they want me gone, they'll have to tell me to my face. Daniel's eyes softened, but his words stayed sharp. And if they do? Her voice was steady, though her heart twisted. Then I'll still stand, because bowing once means bowing forever. In the saloon, Jack Doyle lifted a glass, his grin cruel. Let her fight the whole town for me. By the time I ride again, she won't have a soul left standing with her. The guns had failed to break her, but now fear was spreading faster than fire, and Ayanna knew that the next battle might not be fought against Jack Doyle's men, but against Dry Creek itself. The church bell tolled at midday, not for prayer, but for a meeting. Word had spread that the townsfolk wanted a vote, whether the Apache woman should be forced out of Dry Creek. By the time Sheriff Caldwell arrived, the pews were full, the air thick with tension. On one side sat ranchers and merchants, their faces drawn with fear. On the other sat farmers, blacksmiths, and a handful of women who had quietly brought food to Ayanna's camp. Between them stretched a gulf wider than the desert itself. Caldwell slammed his hand on the pulpit. Let's have order. You all know why we're here. Doyle's stirring trouble, but it ain't her fault. She stood when no one else did. If we drive her out, we tell him he can run this town by fear. A rancher rose, his voice sharp. Easy for you to say, Sheriff? You don't have a wife and children hiding under the bed every time a gunshot cracks. That woman mocked him, and now he won't rest until he's bled us dry. If she leaves, maybe he leaves us alone. Murmurs of agreement rippled. Then Jonah Price shot to his feet, fists clenched, voice breaking with passion. She saved us. You think Doyle would have stopped at her? No. He'd have burned this whole town if she hadn't stood first. She's the only reason we're not already ash. A shopkeeper's wife added, her voice trembling. If we turn her out, what do we teach our children? That we trade courage for comfort, that fear decides what's right. The hall erupted, shouts, curses, fists pounding pews. Caldwell fired his revolver into the rafters, the shot silencing all. Enough. You want to tear each other apart while Doyle waits at the ridge. That's his plan, and you're handing it to him. But the seed was already sown. The town was split. That evening, Ayanna entered Dry Creek herself. She rode slow, her head high, her presence alone turning whispers into silence. Children pointed, women clutched shawls, men folded their arms with suspicion. She dismounted at the square, her voice carrying clear. I hear you debate whether to cast me out. Say the words to my face. The silence thickened. Finally, the same rancher who had spoken in church stepped forward. Your trouble, woman. Ever since you mocked him, he's been after us. Maybe you've got courage, but it's your pride that'll get us all killed. Ayanna met his eyes unflinching. It wasn't my pride that brought torches to my camp. It was his. And if you bow to that, then you bow to every man who'd make himself your master. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in approval, others muttered curses. Daniel Harper stepped forward, shotgun across his chest. She's right. Doyle's not hunting her alone. He's testing all of us. You throw her out. You throw out your last defense. Jonah added fiercely. If you can't see that, you're already beaten. The standoff grew heavy. Two halves of Dry Creek glaring at each other across the square. Caldwell's face was carved with frustration, but he said nothing. He knew words would not mend this divide. That night, lanterns moved like fireflies across the town. Some townsfolk gathered quietly at Ayanna's camp, bringing bread, blankets, and water. They said little, only nodding before slipping back into the dark, but others gathered in the saloon, their voices sharp with anger. "We can't wait," one man hissed. "If the sheriff won't drive her out, we will." Jack Doyle's whispers had worked. By midnight, a plan was brewing, not to face her openly, but to force her from Dry Creek under the cover of darkness. At her camp, Ayanna felt the shift in the air. She sat by her fire, her eyes on the horizon. Daniel paced nearby, restless. Jonah sat with his hammer across his knees, refusing to sleep. "They'll come," Daniel muttered. "Maybe not Doyle, maybe not his men, but some of our own. Fear makes neighbors into enemies." Ayanna's gaze never wavered. "Then I will face them as I faced him." Her calm steadied the air, but inside she knew the truth. The fight was no longer only with Jack Doyle. It was with the very town she had stood to protect. By dawn, Dry Creek would show its true face, whether it chose to stand with her or to betray her into the desert night. The knock came just before dawn. It wasn't the thunder of Doyle's men this time, but the heavy, hesitant pounding of townsfolk boots. Ayanna rose from her blanket, rifle already in hand, and opened the door to find 3 men standing on her porch. They weren't outlaws, just ranchers, men she'd seen buying salt and flour in town. Their faces were pale in the half-light, their hats pulled low. The one in front cleared his throat. "We came to talk," he said, though the shotgun in his hands told a different story. Daniel stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Talk with that?" The rancher shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the others. "You've brought too much fire down on us. Doyle won't stop, and the sheriff won't stop him. If you leave now quiet before the sun's up, we can all breathe again." Ayanna's gaze was steady. "And if I don't?" The man swallowed. "Then we'll make you." Behind her, Jonah's hammer scraped against the doorway as he rose, his voice hot. "You'd turn your guns on the one who stood for you." The rancher's face twisted with shame, but his fear was stronger. Better one woman gone than a whole town burned. For a moment, silence pressed heavy. Then Ayanna stepped forward, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "If you think sending me into the desert will quench Doyle's pride, you know nothing of men like him. He'll take me, and then he'll take you. Fear doesn't end when you feed it. It grows." The men shifted, uneasy. One lowered his gun, muttering, "She's right," but the leader shook his head, his pride locked tight. Daniel moved between them, his shotgun raised. "If you want her gone, you'll go through me first." Jonah's hammer lifted next. "And me." The standoff stretched taut, breathless. Then Sheriff Caldwell's voice cut through the dawn. "And me." He stood at the edge of the yard, revolver drawn, his deputies behind him. His mustache twitched as his gaze swept the ranchers. "What in hell are you fools doing?" the rancher stammered, lowering his gun. We thought it best." "You thought wrong." Caldwell's voice was gravel. "You aim a weapon at this woman again, and I'll see you rot in a cell till your grandchildren forget your name. Now get." Shamefaced, the men slunk away, their boots heavy in the dirt. When they were gone, Caldwell turned to Ayanna, his eyes weary. "He's winning, Doyle. Not with guns, but with fear. He's got half the town ready to eat itself alive." Ayanna's face remained calm, but her words were heavy. "Fear is his fire. If you let it burn, it will consume all." The sheriff holstered his revolver, sighing. "Maybe. But some flames don't die easy." Later that morning, the square filled again. This time, the whispers weren't just about Doyle. They were about her. "She'll bring the town down. She's the only reason it still stands. Better she leave before blood's on all our hands." The division cut deeper than ever. Children watched wide-eyed from doorways as adults shouted over each other. Jonah tried to speak, but was shouted down. Daniel stood firm, but his words fell on deaf ears. Finally, Ayanna stepped into the square herself. Silence rippled like a wave. She faced them all, her voice steady, carrying without need of a shout. "You argue whether to cast me out, but know this, I will not leave. This land is mine, and I will not bow to a coward's pride. If you would drive me into the desert, then take up your guns and do it now." Gasps swept the crowd. No one moved. No one spoke. Her calm defiance pinned them in place more than any bullet could. After a long silence, Caldwell spoke. "You heard her. She won't run." And I won't let you force her. Doyle is the enemy, not her. Remember that before you damn yourselves." The townsfolk broke apart, some muttering curses, others whispering praise. But the line was drawn deeper, carved into the heart of Dry Creek. That night, Doyle sat in the saloon, his hat low, his grin wide. His men filled the room with laughter, but his eyes gleamed cold. "She's tearing them apart," he murmured. "Half the town wants her gone. All I have to do is wait. When they turn on her, I won't need to fire a shot." At her camp, Ayanna sat by the fire, the night wind carrying the weight of the town's whispers. Daniel paced like a restless wolf. Jonah hammered iron spikes into the fence with a fury that belied his age. Caldwell lingered at the edge of the light, watching silently. "You've made them choose," he said at last. "Some will stand with you, some won't. And when Doyle comes again, there won't be room for half measures. Dry Creek will either be with you or against you." Ayanna's gaze stayed fixed on the flames. "Then let them choose. I will stand either way." The riders hadn't returned yet, but the town itself was already at war. And when Doyle struck again, Ayanna knew it wouldn't just be outlaws she faced, it might be her own neighbors. The desert nights grew longer, and with them, the whispers. Dry Creek no longer argued only in the open square. Now conversations happened in back alleys, behind barn doors, and in the dim corners of the saloon. Fear had a way of silencing the loudest voices and sharpening the quietest ones. It was there, in the saloon's back room, that a small group of townsfolk gathered in secret. They were ranchers and shopkeepers, men who had once laughed at Jack Doyle's swagger, but now found themselves nodding along to it. Doyle sat at the head of the table, his hat tilted low, his scarred knuckles tapping the wood. "You all know why you're here," Doyle said, his grin cold. "That woman brought fire down on this town. She mocked me, made me a fool, and now you bleed for it. But I ain't blind. You don't want more fire. You want peace. I can give it to you." The rancher who had spoken loudest against Ayanna shifted uncomfortably. "And what would you have us do?" Doyle leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Simple. Drive her out. Don't need blood. Don't need fire. Just tell her to ride, and keep her riding till the desert swallows her. Do that, and I swear Dry Creek won't feel my wrath again." The men exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered, "And if she refuses?" Doyle's smile widened. "Then you'll know where you stand. But if she's gone, well, the storm ends with her." The deal struck like a bargain with the devil. Some left the saloon that night convinced they'd found a way to save their families. Others hesitated, but fear pressed harder than conscience. By dawn, the whispers reached Ayanna. A shopkeeper's wife came quietly to her camp, her hands trembling as she pressed a loaf of bread into Ayanna's basket. "They're meeting with him," she whispered. "Men from our own town. They think sending you away will save us all." Ayanna's jaw tightened, though her voice was calm. "And what do you think?" The woman swallowed. "I think fear makes fools of us all. And I think you're the only one who stood when the rest of us hid." She left quickly before anyone could see her. Daniel stormed into Ayanna's camp that evening, his face flushed with anger. "They're talking with him, plotting behind closed doors like rats. Some even believe his lies, that driving you out will end this, damn fools." Jonah clenched his hammer, his voice sharp. "So they'll betray the one person who fought for them. They've got less backbone than Doyle himself." Ayanna sat quietly, feeding wood into the fire. "Fear is heavy. Some carry it as shame, others drop it onto the nearest shoulders. Today, those shoulders are mine." Daniel paced furiously. "You can't let them push you out. If you go, he wins." Her gaze lifted, steady. "I will not go. They can shout, they can whisper, they can conspire with devils. I will not bow." Meanwhile, in town, Sheriff Caldwell caught wind of the secret meetings. He barged into the saloon, revolver drawn, scattering Doyle's sympathizers. His mustache twitched with fury as he slammed Doyle's glass from the table. "You think you can sow fear here and I'll just sit back?" Caldwell growled. "This town may be weak, but it ain't yours." Doyle leaned back, unfazed. "Ain't mine yet. But you're losing them, Sheriff. Half the town wants her gone. You keep backing her, you'll fall with her." Caldwell's jaw worked. "Better I fall standing than live crawling." For the first time, Doyle's grin faltered, but only for a heartbeat. Then he tipped his hat mockingly. "We'll see." The tension split Dry Creek sharper than ever. Some families packed wagons, preparing to leave town altogether. Others sharpened rifles, determined to stand beside Ayanna if Doyle came again. Children whispered her name like a legend, while adults cursed it as a curse. By the well, two men nearly came to blows. One shouted, "She's our shield." The other spat, "She's our doom." Caldwell broke them apart, but he knew the truth. The next spark could set the whole town ablaze. That night, Doyle rode close enough for his shadow to fall across Ayanna's camp. He didn't attack. He only watched from the ridge, his men beside him, torches flickering like eyes in the dark. His voice carried across the desert, taunting. "Your town's already mine, Apache. You'll see soon enough. When they come for you, it won't be me pulling the trigger. It'll be your neighbors." His laughter echoed long after he and his riders vanished into the night. Ayanna stood at her fire, her face unreadable. But inside, her heart knew the truth. Doyle's guns had failed to break her, but his whispers were working faster than bullets. Daniel broke the silence, his voice hoarse. "He's poisoning them. If you're not careful, when he rides again, half the town will already be on his side." Jonah's hammer struck the ground, sparks flying. "Then we show them Doyle's fear is a lie. We fight louder than his whispers." Ayanna nodded slowly, her voice calm but hard. "Then let it come. When the choice is forced, they will reveal their true face, and so will I." The storm was no longer waiting at the ridge. It was brewing inside Dry Creek itself. And when it broke, Ayanna would face not just Doyle's riders, but the betrayal of her own town. The air in Dry Creek was heavy as lead. Everyone felt it, like the desert itself was holding its breath before a storm. For days, whispers had turned to plans, and plans now edged toward action. Jack Doyle didn't need to ride in with fire. His poison had already seeped deep into the town. It began at dusk, when 5 men, faces drawn tight with fear, marched toward Ayanna's camp, with ropes slung across their saddles. They didn't come shouting, didn't come firing. They came quiet, grim, like men who had convinced themselves they were doing a necessary thing. Ayanna saw them approach from the porch. Daniel stepped out beside her, shotgun leveled. Jonah gripped his hammer so tight his knuckles whitened. "Stay back," Daniel growled. The lead rancher held up a hand. "We ain't here to kill her, just to send her away. You've seen it. Doyle won't stop until she's gone. If we hand her over, maybe we all live." Ayanna's eyes sharpened. "And when he comes for you after, who will you hand over then?" The rancher shifted uneasily, but his voice hardened. "We've decided. Better one life than a whole town." Daniel's shotgun didn't waver. "Not your decision to make." The men moved to dismount, ropes in hand. Jonah stepped forward, hammer raised. "You lay one hand on her, and you'll lose it." The standoff was seconds from blood when Sheriff Caldwell's voice cracked like a whip. "Enough!" He rode in with 2 deputies, revolver drawn. His mustache bristled as his eyes swept the scene. "You'd tie a rope around her, after she stood when all of you hid? You shame this town more than Doyle ever could." One rancher spat into the dirt. "We do what we must to survive." Caldwell's voice was iron. "Survive crawling? Survive selling your soul? Then you don't deserve this land." The men faltered, shame creeping into their faces, but their fear was stronger. Finally, they mounted again, muttering curses as they rode off into the dusk. News of the confrontation spread like wildfire. By nightfall, Dry Creek wasn't just divided. It was a powder keg. Families barricaded doors. Neighbors eyed each other like strangers. In the saloon, arguments turned to brawls. "She's the reason Doyle's here," one man shouted, swinging a fist. "She's the reason we're still standing." Another snapped back. Chairs splintered, glass shattered, until Caldwell stormed in and broke the fight apart. But even he knew the truth. He could keep men from drawing blood for a night, maybe 2, not longer. Meanwhile, Ayanna sat at her fire, her voice calm despite the weight pressing on her. "It is not Doyle who threatens me most now," she said to Daniel and Jonah. "It is the town. His whispers rot them from within." Daniel paced, fists clenched. "Then we drag them into the light, force them to choose. No more hiding behind whispers." Jonah nodded fiercely. "Let them see her stand again. Let them see Doyle's fear break against her one more time. Then they'll know where the truth lies. Ayana's gaze flickered to the horizon, where Doyle's fires still burned. Then it must happen soon, before they hand me over in the dark. The choice came sooner than anyone expected. Doyle rode at dawn with 10 men, stopping just outside the town. His voice carried across the streets, mocking. "Dry Creek, you know what I want. Hand me the Apache Woman, and I'll ride on. Refuse, and I'll turn your town into ash." Windows slammed shut. Mothers pulled children close. The men who had met him in secret looked at one another with dread. This was the moment Doyle had promised. The bargain made in whispers now demanded in daylight. In the square, the rancher who had tried to rope her shouted, "Give her up. We can't fight him. She's not worth all our lives." But Jonah leapt onto the trough, his young voice breaking but fierce. "She's worth more than you. She's the only one who stood when Doyle spat in our faces. You give her up. You don't save your lives. You sell them." Caldwell drew his revolver, his voice carrying over the square. "You all know me. I'll stand with her, even if it means dying in this dirt. The question is, will you?" The crowd trembled, split down the middle. Some stepped back toward their homes, unwilling to fight. But others, ranchers, shopkeepers, even a few women, stepped forward, rifles in hand. Their boots thudded against the dust as they lined up behind Ayana. Doyle watched from his horse, his grin fading as the line grew. "So that's how it is," he spat. "You'd rather die for her than live with me." Ayana stepped forward, her voice calm but sharp as steel. "No, Doyle. We'd rather live free than bow to a coward." The words rang across the desert, echoing louder than gunfire. The town had chosen sides. Some stood with her, others against, and Doyle, his pride burning hotter than ever, prepared to unleash hell. Dry Creek was one breath away from war. The dawn that followed was not quiet. It was heavy, like the desert itself braced for a storm. Dry Creek stood in silence, shutters drawn, rifles polished, families torn in two. Some prepared to fight at Ayana's side. Others prayed Doyle's promise of mercy would hold if she were gone. From the ridge above town, Doyle's men lit their torches, their glow like hungry eyes watching from the dark. The threat was plain. Time had run out. Sheriff Caldwell stood in the square, revolver on his hip, mustache twitching with grim resolve. "This is it," he muttered to Daniel Harper, who stood beside him with his shotgun. "One way or another, today decides whether Dry Creek bends or stands." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we'd better stand tall." Behind them, Jonah Price gripped his hammer, his face pale but fierce. He looked to Ayana, who stood calm despite the tension clawing at the air. Her braid was pulled tight, her rifle steady in her hands. She didn't need to speak. Her silence alone was a banner. But silence in the town square broke quickly. The rancher who had tried to rope her days earlier stepped forward again, his face twisted with fear. "I say we hand her over now. Doyle don't want the town. He wants her. Give her up, and we live." Murmurs of agreement rippled, though they were drowned by shouts of defiance. "She's the only reason we've got a chance," one shopkeeper snapped back. "You hand her over. You shame every one of us." The square erupted, two sides screaming at each other across the dust. Mothers pulled children close. Men shoved and cursed. Women raised their voices sharper than knives. Caldwell fired his revolver into the sky, the crack silencing them for a heartbeat. "Enough!" he bellowed. "You think Doyle's gonna stop if she goes? He's tasted your fear and he'll keep drinking till this town is dry." Ayana finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying over the crowd. "I will not run. If you would see me gone, then you'll have to drive me with your own hands. But know this, the day you do, Doyle will own you. Forever." The words fell like stones into a well, echoing into silence. At that moment, Doyle's riders began to descend the ridge. The ground trembled with their charge, torches flaring, dust rising like smoke. There was no time left for debate. Caldwell raised his revolver. "Line up! If you've got the courage, stand with us. If not, get out of the way." Men and women scrambled. Some fled into their homes, bolting doors and drawing curtains. Others stepped into line behind Ayana, rifles and pistols raised, eyes burning with defiance. Daniel stood shoulder to shoulder with her. Jonah planted his boots firm, hammer ready. Caldwell and his deputies flanked them, forming a thin wall of resistance at the edge of town. Doyle's men slowed as they neared, their torches casting long shadows across the dirt. Jack himself rode at the front, his face twisted with rage and pride. He pulled his horse to a stop, staring down at the line of townsfolk. "Well, look at this," he sneered. "Dry Creek thinks itself brave, but I see cracks already. Half of you don't even want her here. Hand her over, and you can all crawl back to your holes. Stand with her, and you'll burn." No one moved. The silence was suffocating. Then Jonah shouted, his young voice cutting sharp. "We don't crawl!" He raised his hammer high. "We stand!" The crowd behind him roared, though fear still twisted in their throats. Ayanna stepped forward, her rifle aimed squarely at Doyle. "You want me, Doyle? Then come take me. But know this, every step you take will be met with fire." Doyle's sneer faltered for the briefest instant, then hardened. "So be it." He raised his hand, and the riders surged forward, hooves pounding like thunder. The square exploded into chaos. Gunfire cracked, torches flew, dust and smoke swallowed the light. Children screamed from shuttered houses, mothers cried out in fear, and men fought with the desperation of those who knew there was no turning back. Through it all, Ayanna stood at the front, her rifle steady, her voice cold. Hold the line, and for the first time in its history, Dry Creek did not scatter. It braced. The storm had broken at last. Doyle's riders thundered into Dry Creek, and the fate of the town and of Ayanna herself would be decided in the next breath. The charge hit like thunder. Horses stormed into the square, torches blazing, pistols firing into the dust. Dry Creek erupted in chaos, men and women shouting, smoke choking the air, glass shattering as bullets ripped through windows. But the line held. Sheriff Caldwell fired first, his revolver cracking like a whip, dropping a rider from his horse. Daniel's shotgun thundered beside him, blasting another outlaw off his saddle. Jonah swung his hammer at the leg of a charging horse, sending beast and rider crashing into the dirt. Ayanna stood tall at the center, her braid whipping in the wind, her rifle steady. Every shot she fired struck true. Torches shattered mid-air, revolvers knocked from hands, outlaws thrown from their saddles. She moved with calm precision, her defiance louder than the gunfire. Doyle cut through the smoke on a black stallion, his eyes blazing with fury. He fired twice at her, one bullet grazing her shoulder, the other splintering the post behind her. But she didn't flinch. She leveled her rifle at him, her voice carrying clear. "This ends now, Doyle," he snarled, spurring his horse forward. "Then end it, woman!" Their eyes locked as the square shook with violence. Doyle raised his revolver, but Ayanna fired first. The bullet tore through his hat, grazing his scalp. Blood streamed into his eyes, blinding him. His horse reared, throwing him hard into the dust. A roar went up from the townsfolk. For the first time, they saw Doyle fall, not just stumble, but crash to the ground in front of them all. His men faltered, their charge losing steam. "Drive them back!" Caldwell bellowed. The defenders surged, shopkeepers with pistols, ranchers with rifles, even women with kitchen knives. They fought like people who had finally chosen to stand. The outlaws, once so sure of themselves, found their fire breaking under the storm. Doyle staggered to his feet, blood streaking his face. He grabbed his revolver with shaking hands, aiming at Ayanna. But before he could fire, Jonah charged, hammer raised. The iron slammed into Doyle's wrist, sending the revolver clattering across the dirt. "You're finished," Jonah growled. Doyle reeled, clutching his broken wrist, his pride bleeding out faster than the wound. He tried to rise, but Ayanna was already there. Her rifle pressed against his chest, her eyes steady. "You wanted me bowed," she said coldly, "but it is you who kneels." The square fell silent. The outlaws, seeing their leader on his knees, broke. One by one, they spurred their horses, fleeing into the desert, curses trailing behind them. Only Doyle remained, pinned in the dust, his fury helpless against the weight of his defeat. Caldwell strode forward, revolver drawn, his voice hard. "Jack Doyle, you'll rot in a cell till the desert forgets your name." He hauled Doyle up by the collar, shoving him toward the jail. Around them, Dry Creek slowly exhaled, smoke drifted, torches smoldered, windows shattered, but the town still stood. More importantly, its people stood, side by side, no longer divided by whispers. Ayanna lowered her rifle, her arm bleeding, her breath steady. She looked at the townsfolk, the same ones who had cursed her days before, and saw awe, fear, and something deeper. Respect. Daniel clapped Jonah on the shoulder, pride shining through the soot. Caldwell holstered his revolver, giving Ayanna a nod that spoke more than words. For the first time, Dry Creek had chosen not to bow, and it had been Ayanna who showed them how. The outlaws were broken, their leader bound. But as the town gathered in silence, one question burned brighter than the smoke still rising. Had Dry Creek truly won peace, or only bought time before the next storm? When the smoke cleared, Dry Creek no longer looked like the same town. The square was scarred. Bullet holes in the posts, shattered glass glittering in the dust, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to every board. Yet, unlike so many places swallowed by Doyle's wrath, it still stood. Sheriff Caldwell marched Jack Doyle through the ruins, his broken wrist bound, his pride gone. The outlaw cursed and spat, but his voice was hollow now. The townsfolk who had once whispered in fear now lined the street in silence, watching as he was shoved into the jail. For the first time, Doyle's shadow no longer stretched across their land. Ayanna stood apart, her arm bandaged, her rifle resting against her shoulder. She didn't bask in victory, didn't seek their praise. She only watched, her eyes calm, as the town shifted around her. Daniel Harper approached, wiping soot from his face. "He's finished," he said, his voice rough. Ayanna shook her head. "Men like him don't finish. Others will rise. Pride and greed breed like weeds." Daniel sighed, but his gaze was steady. "Maybe, but today, we proved this town can stand. And it started because you stood first." Nearby, Jonah Price leaned on his hammer, exhausted but grinning. "They'll sing about this for years, the day Dry Creek chose to fight." The boy's words weren't far from truth. Already, children peeked from doorways, mimicking Ayanna's stance, aiming imaginary rifles at invisible riders. Women whispered her name, not as curse, but as shield. Even those who had once begged for her exile now lowered their heads when she passed, too ashamed to meet her eyes. In the following days, the town slowly rebuilt. Boards were nailed over shattered windows, the bell tower repaired, the saloon cleaned of broken glass. Families who had packed wagons to leave quietly unpacked them again. The fear that had once hung over Dry Creek like smoke began to lift, replaced by something sturdier, pride. Yet the memory of division lingered. Not all had stood when the moment came. Some carried shame, others resentment. Caldwell knew that unity was fragile, but he also knew one truth. They had stood together when it mattered most, and it was enough, for now. One evening, Ayanna rode out to the hill where the desert stretched endless and wide. She dismounted, sitting quietly with her rifle across her lap. Daniel found her there, dismounting beside her. "You could leave now," he said softly. "No one would stop you. You've earned peace." Ayanna's gaze stayed on the horizon. "Peace isn't given. It's built. And this land is mine. My husband died for it. I will not walk away." Daniel nodded, his respect deepening. "Then you'll have allies here. You've changed this place, and whether they admit it or not." Ayanna finally looked at him, her voice calm. "I didn't change them. They changed themselves when they stopped bowing to fear." Weeks later, Doyle's men scattered across the desert, leaderless and broken. Some whispered of vengeance, but none dared return. His name faded, replaced by stories of the woman who had faced him down in the square. Dry Creek itself carried on, scarred but alive. Jonah's hammer rang louder in the smithy. Daniel's ranch grew with help from neighbors who once had kept their distance, and the sheriff patrolled streets now watched with a prideful eye. But it was Ayanna's presence that marked the town most. No longer spoken of as a curse, she was now a symbol of defiance, of strength, of the unyielding will to stand when the world demanded surrender. Children whispered her name like a tale. Women found courage in her silence. Men thought twice before mocking her people again. And for Ayana, that was enough. One night, she stood once more in the square, the stars burning overhead, the dust still scarred beneath her boots. She looked at the townsfolk who gathered quietly around her, their faces lit by lanterns. "You were afraid," she said simply. "So was I. But fear is not the end. Fear is the beginning. What matters is what we do with it." Her words lingered in the night air, heavy and true, and in that silence, Dry Creek felt something it hadn't known in years, not fear, but pride. The story of Ayana was not just about an Apache woman mocked in a dusty street. It was about what happens when one voice refuses to bow, even when the cost is heavy. She stood first, and because she stood, a whole town remembered how. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing in the world is not a gun, nor a flame, nor a cruel man on horseback. Sometimes, it's the courage of someone who will not yield. If this story struck you, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of resilience and courage. And before you go, make sure to watch the next story we've linked here. You won't want to miss it.